Yes, my name is Ilkay Holt. I'm sure at least by name, most of you know me, from the course platform. I work for FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And this webinar is being held as part of our online course, which is Farm Data Management, Sharing and Services for Agriculture Development. And this course is provided by CTA, Technical Center for Agricultural and Rural Cooperation, FAO of the United Nations, and PAFO, PanAfrican Farmers Organization. And in this online course, as most of you are actually involved already in the course, we focus on strengthening the skills of professionals who use and manage the data for benefits of farmers and farmer organizations. So I can happily say that we are in the third week of the course, and we have altogether actually we have 2,600 participants in the course from 112 different countries, which is great. And in this webinar, I'm actually with three great speakers, and our first speaker is Ishmael Sunga. In this webinar, Ishmael Sunga, CEO of the SACAU, Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions, will share SACAU's experience with farmer profiling and working with partners in the development of relevant services. We will start with Ishmael, and then I will turn to our subject experts. Valeria Pesce from FAO, again, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and Stephane Boyera from SB Consulting. They will both will address some of the key concepts from what we need to take away from the course. We will aim to address the main discussion points of you all made in the discussion forums within the course. So these discussion points will cover value of the data in agriculture, adoption of ICTs, what are the challenges that we have, data protections and legislations, and finally we also want to talk about some of the implementations of these ICT technologies. So before I leave the floor to Ishmael Sunga, I just want to make a couple of housekeeping notes. You're all actually already using the chat box, which is great. And hello to everyone. Everybody actually is writing hello on the chat box, which is great. And you have actually Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in the banner. You can use that little button to ask your questions to us. We will take the questions at the end, and we will also be recording, obviously, this webinar. Hopefully, for those who can't make this hour, we'll also be benefiting from this hour altogether from this webinar. So that is it from me. Please ask any questions on the chat box, so I will be actually just watching it. Thanks again for being with us. So Ishmael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce myself again. My name is Ishmael Sunga. I work for the Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions, operating from Pretoria. As some of you might know that SACAU is a regional, i.e. Southern African entity, which is a grouping of 18 national farmers unions from 13 different countries in Southern Africa. So essentially we deal with national farmers associations and don't deal directly with farmers, but through their structures. We have been, for the past 6 years, been involved in the registration of farmers from different angles. And I'll start from Tanzania, where the story starts about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, we piloted a concept of a virtual cooperative, which was essentially trying to aggregate the demand of inputs for farmers and also the supply of outputs or products. And we felt that if we aggregated them, to large numbers and large volumes, we would be in a position to leverage volume discounts from input suppliers, as well as from those that were buying the products from farmers. And the understanding was that if we manage to do that on a virtual sort of platform and aggregate over wide geographic areas and demonstrate that indeed we have these volumes, and then in the system then accredit a few suppliers who would then supply the inputs, would then be able to negotiate volume related discounts. And similarly would do the same for those that were buying the products. The idea was tested in Tanzania, Ifakara, and the main product of focus was rice. I just want to highlight a few observations from that work. The first point really was that the value that we were selling to farmers was that if they were able to come together and buy together as a collective, as a cooperative, so to speak, they would be able to negotiate better terms and conditions, including prices from the supplier. So that is the value that we're selling. Come together and get your input cheaper and get your outputs, the price of your outputs better. So that is as simple as it can. In fact, the title of the initiative then was called turning farmers from price takers to price givers. Essentially, we registered farmers for that initiative of giving them value through aggregated services and aggregated inputs. That's what we were selling. We were not selling farmer registration. Farmer registration became the means through which we were going to gather their information and their demand requirements so that we could use that in a consolidated format to negotiate better prices. So that's essentially was the model, and it worked very well. We managed to, on a pilot basis, to achieve up to 25% volume discounts arising from aggregated purchases, and as well as between 10 and 15% on service discounts, particularly for some mechanization services that came through the system. The idea was essentially that yes, every farmer registers and buys using a simple SMS type of arrangement, not an app. So it was made as simple as was possible as we could, so that it was embedded in their general use of the cell phone when they are doing WhatsApp or they're doing SMSs. So we really latched on to something that was already within their DNA, so to speak. We did not have to invent anything. What we did was just to introduce another dimension of using it from an economic sort of perspective. Now, what became very clear as one of the lessons was that you need to register farmers in order for you to be able to be successful in leveraging whatever volume discounts they might achieve, or in terms of supply or inputs, and whatever services might also come to them directly or indirectly. They have to be registered first. So that was a fundamental lesson that we learned. Using that, we then said, wait a minute, maybe let's look at another value proposition, which was talking about how farmers' organizations could register their members. And in the registration of their members, the next step then would be how they can use the large numbers of farmers that have been registered to then do business with the rest of the ecosystem, in as much as we're doing business in Tanzania. So the value proposition shifted from value driven to farmers. Initially, it was now the importance of farmers organizations knowing their members and using the data that they will harvest from their members in an aggregated way, then as a next step to leverage volume discounts, similar to what we've done in Tanzania. This is a fundamental shift in the thinking, which as our highlight towards the end, became a major learning point for us. What actually do you sell? And I'll come back to it later on. To do that, we managed to get a grant to facilitate the farmer registration. And the reason why really it was tagged on to the farmers organization was for a number of points. One is that we thought that farmers organizations were not as credible as they should be because they were not able to demonstrate that they represented large numbers of farmers. They could not, if someone said, show us the figures, they could not show verifiable figures about their membership. So the idea was to ensure that they build a membership profile that they can demonstrate to policymakers, to other value chain actors that this is their worth and they're worth doing business with, which was important as a concept. And they bought into the farmers organizations that we were working with. Then secondly, because they were not able to demonstrate their large numbers, they were not able really to be credible in the eyes of policymakers, in the eyes of the other stakeholders. They just say, okay, you can talk that you are representing farmers, but you are not able to demonstrate. Therefore, we won't listen to you. And in not listening to you, it might, we don't have to fear any reprisal, so to speak, because you don't have that power you should claim to be. So that's value that we were sort of selling from the farmer's perspective. The other one was just the management of data itself. It was manual and difficult to update and difficult to really manipulate so that you can get the analytics behind it. So yes, they bought into it. Now we managed to get the registration going, but in having the registration of farmers going, that's where we really experienced quite a number of issues that were more related to the value that we're selling. We were selling the value that you want to belong to the farmers organization, or you already belong to a farmers organization. We need to have your data so that the farmer will know you better, and the farmer organization rather will know you better, and will be in a position to provide in future better services for you. So it was now selling a service that will come after registration. That was not actually enticing them to register. Yes, it was a noble, in my view, proposition from a farmer's organization point of view, but it did not speak very well to the farmer. The farmer wanted to get the immediate benefit of registering without having to wait for some time when everything will be consolidated. In Tanzania, we actually said, you join, you'll get a discount. In this case, we're saying, you join, it will make your farmer organization stronger and become much more credible, and therefore is going to exert influence in relation to policy as well as in relation to its interactions with other stakeholders. The process of registration itself, we thought initially that we would do it essentially by getting the cell phone numbers of farmers that already had cell phone numbers, the majority of whom actually each farming household had cell phone numbers. And then once we got that cell phone number and the name, then we would build their profiles with time electronically without having to visit them. But we were proven wrong that that system actually of self-registration, particularly if there is no direct benefit or incentive that is attached to that, does not work. If you compare it to cell phone companies, they have a way of attracting people to self-register because there's an immediate value that could be attached to it, which we did not have to try and entice them to self-register. In the end, when self-registration was not that successful, we then employed and deployed assistants, enumerators to try and register as many as we could. We had a target of about 44,000 for Lesotho and about 7,000 for Swaziland. It was a very long and difficult process both in terms of the terrain. If people, some of you might be aware of the topography in Lesotho, where the villages and households are, in some cases, geographically widely dispersed because of the mountainous terrain and also the harsh weather. And of course, there are also issues of connectivity. So the pace of registration becomes very slow. In Lesotho, I'm sorry, in Tanzania, so again, sorry to mix myself up. In Swaziland, it was much easier because the country is fairly compact and it's not too difficult to reach out the different parts. So we managed to achieve that very quickly and much faster than we did in Lesotho. But at the end of the day, the point of the matter was that if you have as happened in this case, if we have the farmers registered in your system and you are not able to provide value-added services, it might be very difficult to retain them and to still have them interested because we did not plan beyond, we did not plan good enough beyond the registration, that if once they are on the system, yes, the farmer organization will benefit. It will do the analytics, but was not able to quickly transform the data that they had into a bargaining tool together. I mean, as they related to particularly the input suppliers and other service providers, as well as with the buyers, which speaks a lot to how this thing needs to be planned out. It really needs to be planned out in a very comprehensive and way. Otherwise, if you have resources or capacity just to register, but you don't have the other capacities to value add on the figures that you have on the registration system that you have, it is not going to. It is actually going to destroy the good intentions that you might have. And going back to farmers, if you are not able to initially provide that value and they disappear, would be very difficult because you have lost their trust and they won't want to be on the system once more. The main lessons that are also coming from this is that conceptually, as farmers organizations, we really need to be able to understand what is it that we are talking about. Quite often, because of the currency of discussions, there is pressure on farmers organizations to delve into areas that they may not have the competence to deal with. In fact, data itself is only useful if it is credible. And farmers organizations, in my view, are not synonymous with data management. Even if they did it right, the question is whether the data or the perceptions out there that farmers with data that is credible will hold. It might be that it won't hold by the nature of farmers organizations not being in that space, which also impedes their ability to monetize the data that they have. My view and my experience is that there's need really for farmers organizations to first of all understand what is it that they are dealing with. What value proposition is it that they have to sell to both to the stakeholders as well as to the farmers? And how is that going to be modeled in terms of a sustainable business arrangement? And then finally, it is also important that they realize that data management and is not necessarily their forte, and then seek partnerships with organizations that are more relevant and more recognized and credible in that space, so that we don't become selfish and want to do it all when we don't have the capacities to do it. And then I think the best solution is then we realize our weakness as farmers organizations, and then seek to latch on to in a partnership format to try and get things going. Trying to say you are going to have the data of farmers as a farmers organization on your own is maybe a very difficult ambition to achieve. Let's be realistic and seek other ways of getting the data that potentially we can get from farmers in collaboration with other institutions. Could be research institutions, could be the private sector. Another observation of fundamental importance is that we tend to think that because we work with farmers, therefore we are privy to the data that they have as farmers. But farmers are human beings who work with a whole host of other agencies outside the agricultural area, and they have similar access to their personal data and to their economic data, and they may be in a better position actually to harvest that data. So the fact that we work with farmers, it does not necessarily make us exclusively the only organizations that are able to they are potentially able to get their data. Everyone, our cell phone companies already, as an example, work with, they already provide services to farmers by way of voice messages, WhatsApp messages, data facilities. And you have already collected information about farmers. And in that case, then, what is it that can we compete with them in this space? I think no. The only way that we can work with them is to really seek partnerships with them. But to be able to seek partnerships with the private sector, we also have to demonstrate what is our value to them. If they can have the data from farmers directly without a farmers organization sitting in between, what is our value proposition? It really becomes very important for us to really reflect much more seriously and purposefully. What is it that we would bring to the table in a partnership arrangement with the private sector, so that they are happy to come to us and work with us? Otherwise, they will continue to ignore farmers organizations as long as they have direct through pass to farmers, not necessarily as farmers, but as human beings, as their customers that they are already dealing with on a day-to-day basis. The final points maybe I need to highlight by way of some of the lessons that we have learned. It is really important to increase the awareness levels of both the farmer and the farmers organization that agriculture has become much more data driven, and therefore we need to do something about it. And something about it may be getting the data ourselves or going into partnership with others. Secondly, the farmer, him or herself, his or her data is not useful. It is only useful insofar as it is aggregated with the data or the data of other farmers in a collective form. So the farmer, him or herself, may not be able to influence it. So it is the important role of farmers organizations to be able to collate and aggregate that demand for it to become useful to the farmers. The other point really is relating to the understanding the data value chain. My view is we tend to emotionally go into the area of data as the new gold, but without understanding what actually are the different value streams that are emerging potentially from data from farmers. And then purposefully and deliberately, in a strategic way, select those value chains which might be data value chains, that is, which might be easier for us to enter into rather than just going in broadly and without the lack of understanding that is required. Fourthly, there's the issue of expertise. I mean, the management, collection, management, and curation of data and its analytics requires fairly high-level skills. And in general, these are the skills that most farmers organizations don't have. and they're very expensive, as I said. So how do we position ourselves in terms of capacities to be able to really leverage that which we potentially have as a gold mine from the competent side? Then the final point really is it is much more important in terms of data-driven agriculture to be focusing more on the young generation of farmers who are more techno savvy, who already have who are already driven by gadgets that ultimately are being used to collect and aggregate data and use data to drive agriculture. So any development efforts in the future should really be focusing largely to the next generation of farmers who already, as I said, are already in that system. In terms of advocacy, it is important to understand that the cost of data and the infrastructure through which data is traveling in Africa in general, Southern Africa in particular, is still very high, which becomes a major issue in terms of data-driven agriculture, because you still have to buy the data to be able to access the internet, to be able to access other services. But if data is very expensive, then it also then renders the very ambition that we want. So there's need for us as farmers organizations to advocate for support, public service, public support towards the establishment of a wide scale, a network, infrastructure network on a wide scale, because the returns from that are going to be very, very, very positive, both from an economic as well as from a social point of view. Particularly if one is talking about risk management related to climate change, if one is talking about the power of information and knowledge, that again is traveling on an infrastructure that is expensive, and invariably that is impeding large numbers, much more than currently is the case, being beneficiaries to the technology revolution that we see unfolding before us. I think at this stage I should stop and maybe get comments and inputs from others.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. I was just going to say that, you know, maybe I didn't know whether you had more to say, but I thought maybe we should just move to Stefan. I think he also has some time restrictions, and maybe we can, you know, take some more questions, and you can just join there afterwards. Stefan?
Okay.
Do you want to take over?
Sure. Good morning to all. So I say hi before cutting my my video. So my name is Stephane Boyera. So I'm the CEO of a French company specialized in software and consulting on ICT for development and open data. And we have been working in ICT for Ag now for more than 12 years. So what I wanted to present to you quickly now is talking about the, you know, how all these data approach fits the specific conditions related to farmers in, you know, rural farmers in developing countries. So we have seen in the forum, and we have seen even today on the question and answer on the question screen, sorry, that's lots of participants are asking, you know, how to implement those approach in the conditions where people live in rural areas in Africa or in developing regions in general. So I will try to address these general questions. So just to step back 1 second, I think one of the core, I would say the core message or the overarching idea of this course is that valuable information that can support farmer to increase their yield, better market their productions and so on. All this valuable information comes from the mashup of two main source of information, global information that's maybe available as open data sets, and these includes weather informations and so on. So that's one module, and the second source of data, the second main source of data, is the farm level data, and the valuable information again comes from the intersection, the mashup of these two sources of data. So the key question is really to see who collects and who do the matchup, who generate these valuable informations in order to support farmers. So if you look in Europe, if you look in US or in developed countries in general, farmers themselves are able to do this, to get the information and to mash it up and generate the information they need for their practice. They have, the equipment like, sensors, computers, broadband connections, smartphones, and so on. And they have also the capacity to do all these tasks. It is true also that the situation is extremely different in most developing countries where people have are less literate and have obviously less access to those technologies. That said, the potential is the same, and the approach somehow is the same. You need data from farm level. You need global data to generate this information, and I think what is really important to say is that the difference would be who will do this task. But the core, I think the core impact come from the access to the trust, the understanding, and the use of the information by farmers. So the key questions, I would say, is to really look at what is the right channel to communicate this information, and that's slightly, I would say, that's slightly outside the core scope of this course, but I think it's important to mention it. It's absolutely critical to understand the context in which farmer operates and what are their capacities and their equipment. What we can see is that technology evolved very, very quickly. 10 years ago or so there were no mobile phones. Now we have 3G, we have 4G, we have in most countries 30%, 40%, or 50% of the population who have smartphone. But the farmers are always those who are left behind because they are really in the most difficult conditions. So when you say there is 20% of illiteracy, you find most of the farmers often in this 20%. When you say 80% of the population of a given country is covered, you can be sure that the last 20%, again, they are the poorest farmers. It's the same for smartphone. The level of adoption is always the latest. And I feel one of the challenge is that there is I would say a kind of mismatch between the offer of services and the demand, in the sense of what is accessible to farmers. So now all countries have youth that are interested in new technologies and so on. They develop lots of applications, smartphones and so on. But largely, all these development, has many of the participants on the line are not accessible to farmers. So really, what's important, and it's to understand what are the channels to deliver actionable information to farmers. From my own experience, there are three channels that are available. One is radio. So there are places where still no mobile phone available, but you still have radio, and that's one way, not the easiest, but one powerful way to provide information to farmers. You have nowadays you have a growing number of services that use voice, and in particular voice-based services is a way to provide tailored information to a farmer in their own language without requiring textual literacy. And the last options that's sometimes also available is intermediaries. If you have extension agents, if you have farmer promoters, and so on, those intermediaries who are usually of higher level of education could be equipped more efficiently with services, so that they provide valuable information to farmers. So again, perhaps to conclude this part, I wanted to say that everything that is, like the core message of this course of how you generate valuable info is about how to generate valuable information to farmers, and that's independent on the capacities of the farmers. The core challenge here, which is outside the discourse, is when you have identified the right information for the right person, how do you communicate, how do you design ICT service or communication to provide this information to farmer, but again, that's something that is not really addressed in this course. I think again, to finish, the message is that as Mr. Sunga mentioned, is the importance of having cooperatives or farmer organizations collecting farm level data, having also those stakeholders advocating for more open data in agriculture and nutrition in their countries. Those two are the building blocks that's enable the generation of information, and that's independent of the capacity of the farmers. There are then ways to deliver those information, but that may be a topic of a future course. So so perhaps I stop here for this theme.
Thank you, Stefan. Thanks very much. And I guess I can just move to Valeria.
Yes, thanks.
Hi, Valeria. Yeah.
I will just share my video for 2 seconds to say hello to everybody, and thanks for participating in the webinar. I will switch it off only because I've seen that some participants are saying that they have connectivity problems. So I will continue without the video. Okay, I'll just unshare the video. And yes, from all the topics that we've seen in the course and that we've seen discussed in the forums, there is one on which I wanted to comment a little. Several participants commented on the lack of a clear legal framework for the protection of certain types of data that are shared by farmers. And they also commented on what needs to be protected that is not currently protected by law. So several participants, of course, said that there is a clear normative framework for personal data. We know that in most countries, personal data is protected. At least there are some basic best practices everywhere, like that you have, if you collect personal data, you have to anonymize the data when you share it. There are, in certain countries, there are very strict laws also on what you can do with the data, on how you can share it again, and all the things that you have to do to protect it. So part of the data that farmers share is, of course, personal data. So whenever any type of data that is collected is linked to a person, to a farmer, that is personal data. So it has to be anonymized, etc., etc. The legal uncertainties start when the data is not so much about the farmer, the person, it's about the farm, the field, data collected automatically by machines, by drones, that contain information on the field location, soil properties, crop growth, and even in some cases, depending on the software and the data exchange, they can have information on yield data, price data, and all of this data reveals a lot about the business. And the issue is not that the farmers don't want to share this data. They know that they have to share this data, for instance, with the service providers if they want to get services back. The issue is mostly about the risk of this data being misused. Even if it's not strictly personal data, it has a lot of sensitivities, and if misused, this data sharing can harm the farmer. And some examples that we have in the course, but some of these have also been raised by the participants in the forum. In many cases, data that is shared by farmers with service providers may represent a competitive advantage for them. Let's say they have special farming practices, and the machines that collect all the data about their farming practices, which is okay if it is shared only with the service provider to get advice, etc. Maybe if it's shared too widely or with certain actors, it may, the farmers might lose the advantage of that information. Other examples is cases in which the disclosure of some data can harm the farmer, so that the data can reveal, for instance, information that could be then shared with other actors and lead in the end, that this is one of the fears that farmers have, for instance, the government doing tax audits because of the information they have on the yield of the farm, etc. Or even data that goes to the technology provider and provides the technology provider with a lot of privileged knowledge about the farm, and then, it can open up to several types of unfair practices, like, for instance, locking the farmer into specific solutions only because you know everything about the farm. And then there's also the issue of the fact that data have commercial value. It may have commercial value. So for instance, other actors may profit from it. So the data that farmers share can have a lot of value for actors that may then sell it to other actors for marketing purposes or other purposes. And also in this case, the risk is just the misuse, not just the fact that the data is shared. And these types of concern often make farmers unwilling to share data. So they know that there are benefits in sharing the data, but the risks are mostly about the potential misuse. Normally, they don't have problems with the legitimate immediate use of data by the service provider, but they don't know about the further reuses of data. With the Internet of Things and clouds, you're not sure where the data is going, and if there is no clear legislation, you don't know where this data is going. So since there is no legislation, what happens is that everything in the end is regulated by contracts. This is something that we also addressed in the course. And this is why it is important to raise awareness, both of farmers and farmers' organizations, and also technology providers and other suppliers, on what are the best practices to share data and what data sharing clauses to include in contracts, for instance. And this is also why the initial self-regulatory instruments that are being created now, like codes of conduct that we describe in the course, focus in the end on best practices for contracts, because contracts are regulating now these types of data sharing, which is not regulated by legislation. And one interesting observation that we had in the course from a participant in the course forum was that it would be important to have specialized legal services for farmers. So legal services that are aware of these data sharing issues, that are aware of data sharing best practices, and that are aware, for instance, of suitable contract clauses to put in contracts or existing codes of conduct. And this, of course, means building the capacities. It could be legal advisors of farmers' organizations. It could be staff at the farmers' organization that gives legal advice, or lawyers that work with farmers. So one of the lessons learned from this forum thread was that perhaps in the future we may add this audience also, lawyers and legal advisors, to the next edition of this course. So we learned a lot from what the participants said in the forum about the situation in their countries, and we saw that mostly the situation is similar in all countries. Like, there is legal protection for personal data, not for the rest of the data, and there are concerns on the part of the farmers on how this data could be misused. Then the course tries to address this and provide some advice on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. That was great. Also making links to the course and the sections and the discussion forums. So we have about 10 minutes left before we finish the hour, and we have many questions in the Q&A list. I'm sure actually some of them has already been answered in some of your talks, but shall I just go over them and try to make as many as we can in the next 10 minutes?
Yeah.
So yeah, Ronnie Musisi was one of the first people actually posted this question, and I think Stefan has already actually pointed out some of the points, but let me just read that out. Throughout the course and its content, we have looked at the data. I feel it has inclined a lot on the ICT to better data uptake and use. My question is, for our sub-Saharan African farmers who have a very low literacy level, how can they use the data collected from them? Because all the protections we have seen lies on the parties collecting being true to the farmer. How do we see ICT helping the smallholder farmer who can't use smartphones?
Can I answer that quickly?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think the smartphone is not the only phone that can collect data. I think we might be severely underestimating the use of the ordinary phone, SMS type, that can collect information in the process of the farmer responding to messages that they're sending out. So there isn't too much focus on smartphones, and yet we can still harvest a lot more from the kind of types of phones that we have. And that type of phone that we have is already being used for different purposes by those that are illiterate, and can also be used to make them better farmers. And the important point for me is that we need to, as I said earlier on, the information that farmers have is only useful in its aggregated format. So it means that we need to find a system like a farmers organization, a collective or a cooperative, that gathers it so that it can begin to mine its value in a collective sense rather than as an individual farmer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very good, your contribution. Valeria, or I'm not sure Stefan is there anymore because he had to leave.
I'm
sorry, great. Sorry.
No, I just very quickly. I mean, I think what I try to give as a core message is that the technology and the people who are collecting data are usually different than the farmer themselves, who mainly have to access the data. And again, it is true that for farmer profiling, in most cases, enumerators are used who are able to use smartphones, and that's the cheapest and the easiest way to collect a big amount of data at once. But again, that's different from providing actionable information to farmer via a channel they can use. And I think it's important to understand who is doing what in these overall dynamics.
Yeah, this actually question came a lot, I know, in the discussion forums. I just moved to the next one, if you allow me. Ben is asking, Mr. Ishmael, the farmers you're registering are they already organized under a group, or you created your own farmer registry?
We are working with the national farmers unions who are our members, and they are working with their local level structures. So yeah, they are already in commodity associations or other associations. It could be district associations. We are not creating our own groups. And the registration actually is handled by the national farmer associations and not by us.
Right. And Emmanuel is asking, how do we ensure that farmers' information is safeguarded for their interests? I guess this is also a question for you, but
I suppose if the farmers, if the organization to which the farmers belong is one that is collecting the information, then there is some level of assurance there because they are already associated with it. But also bearing in mind, as I said earlier on, many other agencies are collecting information from farmers, and they are offering some services in return. This, in my view, is where the problem is because there is no other than a transactional arrangement between the service provider and the farmer. There is no other sort of binding arrangements. Unlike when the data is collected by the farmer, the organization to which the farmer belongs, then there is at least a moral obligation to safeguard that and to use it to the best interest of the farmer. One might argue.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. Yomata, I think this is not a question, but he says through our course we learned about open data, but in my country, Sierra Leone, farms' access to those data is a challenge as our Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry did have the necessary material to do the process the data to farmers. I guess. Yeah.
Maybe we can just yes. Make a quick observation on the fact that there is indeed a lesson on this in the course, where we acknowledge that there is these problems in many countries where the data that is made open by the government is not enough for the farmers, is not customized for the farmer, is not useful for the farmer because maybe it has been designed with other purposes. And there are a number of policy suggestions that we make in the course, like for instance, government holding consultations with stakeholders, in particular with farmers organizations, in order to understand what is the best way to share open data at the government level that are useful for farmers. Or there are all sorts of possible solutions. Very difficult in certain countries is the farmers actually taking the lead and building data platforms together with other technological partners. This is a little more difficult, but more powerful for farmers. So the course actually recognizes this issue and tries to propose some possible solutions. Not really solutions, but suggestions.
Yeah. Thanks, Valeria. Kumenda, I think we already addressed this question, but Kumenda is asking, how do we see ICT helping the smallholder farmers who can't use smartphones? This is again going back to the illiteracy. There are some ICT for agri that are being developed for illiterate and semi-literate farmers so that they can also use the smartphones. So I will just pass this question as we actually already addressed, but if any of you want to add anything, please go ahead.
I think the most important point is to be able to differentiate because all smallholder farmers are not the same. So you need really to be able to differentiate and so that you can provide sort of horses for courses than a broad solution. So there are those that are going to be using smartphones, and there's quite a large number of them. And those that are not able to be using smartphones, they can still access data through their basic gadgets, and there's everything in between. So for me, the important point is to be able to differentiate and be able to tailor-make sort of applications in that sense that are relevant to the different types.
Yeah, and if I may just add, I think indeed there have been quite some progress in the last 5 years or so in what's available, and again there have been lots of progress on things like voice-based services that make information available to people as far as they can only know how to dial a number on their phone. So I think the technology is evolving in order to provide information to illiterate farmer, and traditional technology, again, is still very relevant. Things like radio is relevant, and finally, sometimes it is far more efficient and far more impactful to enable not to provide ICT at the last mile at the farmer level, but just one step before at the intermediaries.
Thanks very much, Stefan. I mean, we have another minute to go, but I suggest, because we do actually have another around 60 questions, which is great. What I suggest is that, because we will go exceed our webinar time, so I suggest I can just put these questions together, and maybe we can just provide some answers after the webinar, and I can share with the participants. Perhaps some of them actually also externally. I'm sure it's not only the course participants are here in the webinar. Does that sound good to everyone? Because I don't want to take more of your times.
Yeah, that is fine with me.
It's fine with me as well.
Yeah, because it is great. It's a great, I think, interactive, quite an interactive, session. So with lots of questions and comments. So I will try to merge them together. And so this is to our participants at the moment. We will make sure that we get back to these questions on the discussion forums. And yeah, because it's at 12 European time at the moment. So I just would like to thank you, everyone. I would like to thank our speakers today for their time. Thanks for being with us today. So this has been quite informative even for me. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye
So
bye.
we'll be in touch.
Bye.